smoking, my friend. You're entering a world of pain.
From Software. They don't need an introduction. What do you think this is, 2009? I remember playing Demon Souls back then and thinking, wow, this is amazing.
Wrong!
It took me at least a few years to get into these games because playing them is like getting shoved into a cold swimming pool. At first you think, oh my god, this feels wrong. What do I do? But the more you play, the more you realize the kinds of freedom and player respect these games offer, in comparison to the often patronizing design of its contemporaries.
You don't want the very best, you want cheap.
But once again, everybody knows this at this point, it's fucking From Software.
It's always been celebrated for its excellence.
What's really surprising is that they've been trying to make the same kind of game for about 30 years now. If you play the Souls games long enough, you're eventually going to hear something along the lines of, oh, you should check out the Kingsfield games. They're like the spiritual prequel to the Souls games. But here's the thing about that. While I have heard good things about the fourth Kingsfield game on the PS2, playing the original PS1 Kingsfield games is rough, like too rough for even me to defend. They're incredibly ambitious, to be sure, and incredibly important for the trajectory of the company, but the gameplay is like if LSD Dream Emulator had a Dungeons & Dragons expansion.
Do we run about the corridors? Do we run around screaming?
For a while I'd kind of written off FromSoft's catalog on the PS1, aside from a little bit of Armored Core every now and then. I've been tempted to play Echo Knight, but I feel like I'd have to be in a specific mood to play that game. This one here is worth playing. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in the same way I would recommend their Demon Souls type RPGs, but it is great compared to a lot of the other works they were trying to make at the time. While the Kingsfield games provided the entire framework for the gameplay, Shadow Tower fits a bit closer to the Souls games in terms of its mood, structure, and visual presentation. In certain ways it even feels like a missing link between the Kingsfield games and what would eventually become the Souls games. Ooh, look at that demon go! Whoosh!
Oh, fuck.
Is that a bonfire? Yes. So what? What's the story, Wendy? Who's that person? Is that Roos Hardy? What's the Shadow Tower? Oh, it's just that thing over there. Really? I mean, it looks kind of short for a tower. Is that really as high as it goes? Yep. And this is a full-length RPG? Yeah. Weird. It shouldn't take me long to get up that thing. Up! The first thing I immediately start to respect about this game is that, much like the Armored Core games that came before it, it has a full button mapper in the options. The most you get out of a lot of PS1 games when it comes to control options is a small handful of presets, but here you have the freedom to make any button do what you want it to do. For me, I like to do kind of a crude version of a modern analog-style control system, where the D-pad on the left and the face buttons on the right fill in the directional roles of their respective analog stick, and the shoulder buttons control the left and right hands as they would in the Souls games. It's really rough at times, especially if you haven't gotten used to it yet, but this is the closest I've gotten to this game having decent controls. It's a bit of a shame because this is a late 90s PS1 game. A lot of the games at the time were beginning to have analog support, but it just goes to show how revolutionary the movement and camera use for the sticks was when they were first starting to implement it, and when it started to become the standard. If you want a great example of a first-person game with good analog controls on the PS1, yes, they do exist. Try playing the Medal of Honor games.
Killing Nazis.
It's a testament to how important good controls are to making a game enjoyable. There's so many games from this era that would probably be seen as much better games if the controls had been better. Of course, there wasn't really a gold standard for how a lot of these 3D games worked in terms of controls, especially first-person console games, so I appreciate that Shadow Tower gives the reins over to the player in that regard, instead of dropping you in with a control scheme that feels like it was designed by an insane person. You know, like the default controls they give you, which yes, were the controls for the Kingsfield games, which you couldn't change. No, I am not using the trigger buttons to look up and down, goddammit.
Agony, enmity, and despair. These are my pleasures. I need new playthings.
If there's one game I could compare this to in terms of graphical design, it would be something like Silent Hill, which came out around the same time. Both games aren't concerned with the colors being super vibrant, but it's still impressive how both games managed to model pretty much everything in 3D. Environments have very earthy or realistic colorings to them, but it's designed in a way where things still look very interesting. It's not like that wave of games in the mid to late aughts where they just put a grey and brown filter over everything. Each model is individually colored, and each environment has their own unique textures and wall shapes. It does so much better of a job than the Kingsfield games do in terms of visual coherence and blending. The Kingsfield games always had these really garish combinations of early PS1 texture work strewn about the environments, and in a way I can't even fault them for that, because the game they were trying to make was literally ahead of its time. The game initially lulls you into thinking that the enemies are going to be your standard fantasy fare, but it soon fades away into the back of your head once you get into the prison areas and start coming up against shit like this.
A terrifying creature called
Fanged worm. It may look cute, but don't let it fucking bite you.
You got to know now is how we.
And this.
Blood Skull. A Halloween pop smothered in Smucker's raspberry jam. The jam is expired, so it might poison you if you get too close.
Much like the exterior of the Shadow Tower in the intro cutscene, skeletons and slimes are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to enemy types. There's a total of 150 fully modeled enemy types in this game, and they do not stay normal for long. A lot of what makes this game fun is just seeing what weird shit the game throws at you in terms of enemy design. In previous episodes, I usually talk about the role that music can have in the enjoyment of a particular game, but the more I show you stuff from this game, the more thought will begin to rise in your mind. Wendy, why are you analyzing the aesthetics of a game that doesn't even have a soundtrack? Simple. Listen to this. This game pulls an insanely good trick on the player, and it's essentially the video game equivalent of those meme videos you sometimes see where it's an hour of silence occasionally broken up by the metal pipe falling sound effect. It's a fascinating piece of design because I really couldn't tell you how the damn thing works. Sometimes there's ones that activate as soon as I interact with something, and sometimes you hear them just walking down a random passage. I only heard about a little more than half a dozen voices or sounds in this playthrough, with some being ones I had never heard or remembered before in previous runs. Because there's no soundtrack, all you're hearing for the most part is that iconic PS1 metronome of your footsteps and the occasional creaking door, so when something like this happens seemingly out of nowhere, it cuts through the silence like a bullet. My best guess is that there's a small selection of sound clips that have the possibility of playing depending on what zone you're in, but the way the sounds are triggered is never explained or obvious enough to become predictable in any way. Because the game deals in RPG-type mechanics, there's a wide array of fucked up things that the enemies can do to you. You start out with enemies that may poison you if you're not lucky, but once again this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once you start looking around the cursed region, you find shit like hanging spiders that can blind you, or these tongue demons that can drain your health simply by being near you. I know I mentioned this in my SMT video, but I usually respect when enemies that are supposed to be scary have the possibility of doing scary shit to you instead of just looking intimidating. Oh shit, it's Fat Mole, let's fucking go.
You son of a bitch.
He works as kind of a guide to the Shadow Tower. He only shows up once or twice per zone, but he always tells you important pieces of world building, and you can definitely tell that the voice actor is taking some liberties with the script.
This area was built by men, yet not many around. No, but there are some of your kind below. This tower is divided into 6 worlds, and each one has a ruler. They're as powerful as you might imagine.
Layer 2, Earthworld, Gangrene.
The game kinda counts Earthworld as the first official world of the game, and there's a couple gameplay elements that they introduce in this section that really cement the core gameplay loop going forward, namely the repair shops.
Huh? What would a human want here?
One of my favorite elements of the game is that whenever you kill an enemy, there's a bit of randomness in terms of what you'll receive in terms of items or equipment. There were a couple of drops every now and then that I hadn't even received in previous runs, but a lot of the equipment you do receive doesn't arrive in the best shape possible. So going to the repair shop is essential for using the weapons and equipment that you want to use. But here's the catch with that. The coins that you pick up throughout the Shadow Tower, which kind of look like ancient Japanese coins, only work within the item shop.
A human. Oh well. What do you want?
And what's available in the item shop is constant throughout the entire game, which is some basic healing potions and antidotes, some level up capsules, and some random pieces of equipment that you can't really find anywhere else in the game. So the trick with the repair shop is that you don't pay with coins, you essentially
Pay with your blood!
Because the only way to repair equipment in this game is with health points. Aside from a very specific area later in the game that's hard to return to, there's no way to refill your health without using a health potion. Which means that health in this game is not something you can just refill by resting at a checkpoint. Health in Shadow Tower is a limited currency. Sure, you can buy them at the store with a coin, or you can trade in pieces of equipment for them at specific points, but every means to get health potions involves some kind of sacrifice. Sure, some of the enemies can drop health potions, but that also involves reducing the durability of the weapon you killed them with. While there are certain items called soul pods you can find, which allow you to choose which of your attributes to level up, most of the leveling up in this game is done by killing enemies. which in turn lowers the durability of your weapons more. All of these gameplay elements create this really tense dynamic that rewards careful use of health, resources, and equipment. If you want to get the most out of your health potions, you have to use them when your health is as close to zero as possible, because every health potion in the game counts as a full heal when you use it. So using a healing item when you already have a decent amount of health is kind of considered a waste of currency. These eyeball flowers have this really cool attack animation where they shoot a laser along the floor, and they use this kind of impact texture to make it look like it's hitting the ground. Every enemy has their own idle animation, attack animation, damage taking animation, and death animation, all complete with their own set of sound effects. A lot of enemies even have multiple attack animations. These statements might sound a little basic when talking about some other games, but remember that there are 150 fully modeled enemy types in this game that exhibit these same qualities. This is what primarily makes this game interesting in terms of its aesthetics and interactivity. There's nothing like a basic humanoid framework that blankets a wide array of enemy animations like in the Souls games. Each enemy type in Shadow Tower is individually modeled and individually animated. The amount of work that's gone into the sheer number of creature designs, animations, and sounds is sometimes hard to compare to other games at the time. Sure, a lot of turn-based RPGs at the time had tons of 3D modeled enemies, but they weren't really designed with the intent that they would be engaged in a real-time, interactable action sense. For the most part, Shadow Tower plays like a first-person action game, but compared to a lot of other action RPGs at the time, there isn't really much that's lost when converting turn-based RPG mechanics into action mechanics.
You've got the shinin!
It might sometimes feel like you're controlling a robot that acts like a person, especially with the attack animations.
Help me! Don't let the monster eat me!
But aside from a general layer of jank, the mechanics here are playing with a full deck of cards. How you gonna hurt me? You're a fucking tree, you can't even move.
Please don't hurt me. I'll even give you this key here.
Goodbye. There are certain things you'll learn to accept in a world such as this.
I didn't realize it was Happy Hopping Moron Day.
I was imprisoned in this body by a creature named Durian. Please, break the seal and return me to my true body. This body, I cannot move it well. Even so, I never thought I would be defeated by that lump of clay, by that bastard Durian.
I don't want to do this no more.
Hey, you can't go that way. The floor is covered with poison. Come this way.
Of course this game has a poison area.
Fool! Who said you could come in?
Yeah, what the fuck?
That bastard Durian.
I meant no ill will. Please help me.
Get over here, you little
bastard.
Oh, the key!
I despise humans, but to you I offer my thanks. Be careful in your journeys.
Should have equipped my nail clipper, am I right, ladies?
I beg of you, stop the rock! It should stop if you stick that sword in the wall!
Go, 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 go!
King Gels went ahead here. I stayed and have been holding on to the rock since then.
Die!
This area here is full of like really fucked up enemies. You've got these like blue raspberry flavored laser spitters, these little squeaky worm babies that shoot out poison. You got sharp looking fishmen, you got these bouncy little shits that shoot acid at you. You get your first bow here by killing these These palm tree things look really funny. They just have like these really long arms. There's also this room off to the side that's basically a fucking death sentence that has a bunch of giant golem looking things that create earthquakes that can kill you from a couple rooms over. It's a lot of fun.
You're wasting your time! Go home!
Debug. Vaguely anti-Semitic.
Forgive me, I was just joking before.
What the hell's that noise? It sounds like somebody opening a creaky cabinet or something.
Hobbling.
Oh, some carrots. Looks like somebody was planting some carrots down here. Oh, fuck. Well, this certainly isn't helping with my eyesight. I suppose it's a decent sign when you're making a medieval game and the 39th enemy type you come across is the first one that's a knight in armor. Take that, Dark Souls 2. Just kidding. I actually really like Dark Souls 2, even though the enemy design's kind of garbage. They start throwing those little bouncy acid-spitting motherfuckers at you again, and if you're not careful, their acid spray will deal like multiple health potions worth of damage on your equipment, so steer clear. Because there's like no invulnerability window when it comes to attacks like magic fields or sprays, so if you get caught in one, you'll just get drenched in damage very quickly until you escape the area of effect. I never understood why this area is called the False Pit area. That shit's a real pit. It's got giant Chad cockroaches and skeleton birds that shoot soul ray at you. There's this gauntlet here you have to get through with these really cool looking jewel demons and green knights again. And this next room is where you meet the first boss of the game. It's got a very similar structure to some of the earlier Souls games, where the only way to reach the final boss is to defeat each reigning boss of a particular world or zone. I'm assuming the game wants you to have this epic, tense, close-quarter battle with these bosses, but I always save up the durability of my bows, so I can just cheese them from across the boss room. You'd think that using a bow in a game with controls this awkward would be kind of a hassle, but every enemy has a really generous hitbox, so you can just sort of aim in their general direction, and it'll do as much damage as it can.
I am Apollos, one of the 7 knights of the great King Edward. I was turned to the darkness and captured by the will of King Edward. But now at last I am freed from my torment.
Layer 3, Fire World, Habanero Hallways.
Fire!
The majority of Fire World is comprised of gauntlets. The first couple of worlds focus a bit more on establishing the dark, lonely atmosphere of the game, broken up with rooms full of enemies, but this world kind of reverses this dynamic. It's a really nice way to ramp up the pace of the game as you approach the midpoint, and while Fire World is slightly shorter than the previous 2 worlds, it makes up for it by populating the environments with a lot more danger. Most of this zone is drenched in this kind of warm glow of heat, and you'll soon discover once you enter the Phoenix Cave that fire damage really hurts. Thankfully, the game is aware of this, and puts a few items called Fireworld stones that greatly reduce the damage that fire does. In this way, the Phoenix Cave works as a kind of subtle tutorial for the remainder of this world. It's only a couple of rooms, but it's full of tricky, hard-to-hit enemies, deadly area hazards, switches to pull, and a couple of Fireworld stones to help with the stress. Burning Cavern is kind of intriguing from a design perspective because it's completely made out of metal. Up to this point the enemies were weird, but were mostly framed in a kind of fantasy setting, but here you're going up against these abstract tower golems that shoot heat rays, and robots that shoot their hands at you like fucking Venom Snake.
Rocket to punch!
As intimidating as these areas are, the game can sometimes offer a safety net if you find yourself struggling with something. There's a few pieces of fire-resistant armor that are lying around here, and I always thought it was super cool that weapons, armor, amulets, bracelets, rings, and items have their own pre-rendered sprite in the equipment screens. The game doesn't have a system where you can upgrade the weapons you pick up, but there are so many variations of weapons and armor that it essentially mitigates that point entirely. Your upgraded gear is just the better version you find a couple of areas later. On top of that, there's this entire system of enhancements or bonuses that certain pieces of equipment have that really allow you to create interesting builds simply by combining different pieces of gear. There are swords that do more blunt damage or have better critical chance than the standard variants. There are weapons that can only exclusively be used with two hands, eliminating the use of a shield, but usually have enough stat bonuses attached to them that losing the stats that come with a shield isn't really a huge issue. Since the ability to customize your stats is treated more like a secondary bonus mechanic, the main thing that defines your stats and builds is the equipment itself. Are you unsatisfied with the amount of defense or health you have at the moment? Equip a sword or a piece of equipment that gives you extra max health and defense. Do you want your move bar to fill up faster? Equip weapons, armor, amulets, and bracelets that increase your speed stat. Certain pieces of equipment increase the amount of damage you can do with certain damage types, so if you equip some armor, amulets, rings, etc. that happen to increase your piercing stat, the amount of damage you do with rapiers and bow type weapons goes from reliable to borderline busted. It gives a lot of freedom to the player to customize their build depending on what kind of weird bullshit the game throws at you. I've mentioned this a little before, but FromSoft RPGs are always at their best when you can find ways to make the game easier simply by understanding and engaging with the game's mechanics. FromSoft's output can sometimes have this negative image surrounding them where newcomers assume these games are cruel and unfair for the sake of it, but that's mostly false.
Mostly.
In my experience with this company's output, the games are less about being stupidly hard, and more about creating an impressive psychological atmosphere that can often fool you into thinking that it's a lot harder than it actually is. Sure, this room full of fire and giant laser-spitting towers is intimidating, but use a fire world stone here, equip some fire-resistant equipment there, and hit them with a damage type they're weak to, and it can turn an area that was initially an 8 out of 10 on the difficulty scale to a 4 out of 10. These feelings of victory by means of comprehension are at the core of what makes these games so enjoyable. These Wheel Knight enemies are fucking terrible. They have this really quick lunging attack that destroys your health bar in seconds, and it can be hard to keep a bead on them with their quick movements. Thankfully at this point the game throws a couple of magic rings at you, which give you the ability to cast spells, which for the most part are fantastic. My personal favorite is the Caustic Bubble Shower, which is my ace in the hole for the entire game.
I'm biting the fart bubbles.
You end up fiddling around with some teleporter gates, and eventually come to this area where you encounter this fucking edgelord.
You will not go any further. I'll turn you to ash with my flame.
How can you see?
You can't really hurt him, but as soon as you leave the room, Fat Mole meets back up with you.
Oh, obnoxious, isn't he? All the fire monsters are very snotty. Oh, who do they think they are, anyway? I'll open this door for you. If I do that, you should be able to take care of Abraxas.
The crack cocaine spider.
What is it with From Software associating fire areas with
spiders?
After pulling a switch, the edgelord dies in a single hit, but you find this weird fiery void dimension behind him with doom enemies and Cerberus dogs, skeleton mages and shit. It's a hell of a gauntlet.
Shush!
Turns out the edgelord was only for show, and the real boss of this area is accessed by using a special transporter key that you find.
It is my pleasure to cross swords with other warriors. Let us do battle.
Okay.
I duel with him in the most honorable way possible, which is just shooting him full of arrows until he dies.
It is still a far way to the crown, but it is good to struggle.
I also find it to be a cool touch that when you kill the boss of this area, the sort of glow of fire in the area is completely gone. It works in a similar way to the other worlds of the game, where once you kill the boss of that area, the areas in the world light up a bit and are a little easier to see in, almost as if killing the boss of a particular area sort of lifted a veil of darkness.
The river of the heart is ahead. Let it swallow you up in its fierce, relentless current. Layer 4, Water World, Melting of the Spirit.
I am under the water.
Since this is a late 90s 3D game, you're going to be going in assuming that an area such as Waterworld is going to be full of annoying water level gimmicks, but no, actually, it's worse. Your boy Fat Mole gives you the lowdown of this area pretty quickly.
Oh, the only water in this tower is in Waterworld. Oh, it's actually acid, though. Be careful, or you'll get yourself melted. Oh, very bad.
So yeah, it's technically not Waterworld, it's Acid World. Since you're going to be wading through sections of acid for a while, the best thing to do in this zone is to go full Tarantino mode and take your shoes off. The acid doesn't hurt anything besides the parts of you it touches, so walking through acid is a lot easier in your bare feet.
Logic!
You end up finding this pitcher and a chest off to the side and come across this little area where a woman describes that the water behind her is the only real source of water in the Shadow Tower, and allows you to drink from it if you have the pitcher. As soon as you drink it, it gives you the exact same effect as the health potions do, and you realize that every health potion in the game is actually just a fucking water bottle. The game just wants you to stay hydrated, I suppose. Aw, look at that smile. When I came back to this area a little later to see if any more enemies had spawned, I was met with this weird enemy I'd never seen before in my previous runs. It instantly cursed me, because of course, but I really love how all the enemies that look cursed in this game are cursed. And it's a scary status effect because while it's essentially a slower acting version of poison that also affects your MP, it doesn't go away unless you have a cure for it, of which there are a small finite amount throughout the entire game. The enemies themselves are finite as well. Every once in a while you'd get an enemy that spawns in after killing another one, but it's not something that keeps happening. It completely removes the idea of farming experience points, which isn't even a problem because it's pretty easy to make broken builds, even without accumulating a bunch of XP from killed enemies. This next section might be my least favorite in terms of design, mainly because I never know if I'm going through it correctly. You're met with this big pool of acid in the middle of the room and these weird dumpy fish dudes that occasionally show up, but the only way to progress I've found is to essentially submerge yourself into the acid and do the area while the equipment you choose to have on you is hopelessly destroyed. I suppose you could dunk yourself into the acid while being completely naked, but there's also enemies down there, so I kinda want to defend myself. Welcome to the worst area in the game. You've heard of poison swamps in Souls games, but how about an acid maze? I hope you have a lot of health potions stored up, because health is a tax that must be paid in this zone. The longer you take to get through the area, the more health you lose from the acid floors. The only good thing about this area is that there's a couple funny looking enemies here. There's these weird green dragon things, these buff alien looking things, these snake weirdos, but most important of all, these big frogs that give really good amounts of XP and equipment and don't really hurt you much. They just hop around and look cute, so you kind of feel bad for doing away with them. Poor things. White Rain area really reminds me of those final sections in the Demon Souls Archstones where it either thrusts you instantly into the final boss fight of that area, or it's a couple of small rooms that lead to the final boss. There's these cool looking flying fish enemies surrounded by acid spitters, and at the end of the hall you find the boss of Waterworld.
It would have been easier for you if you had melted away.
The boss itself isn't too bad if you keep your distance and fire arrows.
Worthless fool, you could never become king.
What really makes me happy in this area are these turtle-looking enemies in the boss room. I always assume these enemies you find in Liurnia in Elden Ring were a reference to these things, but perhaps it's just a coincidence. I like to believe the former, since Miyazaki loves to put references to early FromSoft games in his games. But it's stuff like this that really highlights why I enjoy a lot of the visuals in this game. I was always fond of those games or pieces of software from the 90s, where they primarily focused on just showing you random pieces of 3D imagery, like those old chat room games or stuff like LSD Dream Emulator. It's so quaint. It just screams of look what we can do with all these polygons and shapes now. It's the exploration of a new medium, and it's really charming to experience.
What's this?
Prepare yourself.
Layer 5, Illusion World.
Wocky Slush.
Stop this insane shit.
Gun to my head, I'd choose Illusion World as the best world in the game, because for the most part it's an encapsulation of the best aspects of Shadow Tower, i.e. weird areas with weirder enemies. It's a world that makes me wonder if it was created just to put enemies there that didn't really fit in other worlds. You meet another living human being in this room, but he doesn't stay alive for long.
It seems he has been killed. This type of man could never become king. Should we test you next?
You end up getting ambushed by whatever the fuck these things are. And there's not always a reliable way of avoiding damage from a lot of these enemies because a lot of them have area of effect attacks. Gloomy Domain has a couple of really fun scenarios that it puts you in, with the best one being this one here. There's these balcony-looking areas with these shuffling puppet-type enemies, and at the far end of the room you come across this window that overlooks the stage. There are two cursed enemies in this area, a flutist and a violinist. If you go anywhere near these windows, you'll immediately get cursed as soon as you start hearing their tune.
With a name like
Bewilderment,
it has to be good.
It's not as disorienting as it sounds. It's this semi-maze-like area full of wall turrets, And there's these rooms that almost immediately curse you once you enter them, because they have these rotting heads above the door frame. There's these goat things that have really fast attacks, there's these Spartan enemies that take a lot of damage, and there's this weird panel that raises up in one of the rooms where you can see the corridor ahead of it, but I didn't really understand what you needed to do with it. Consider me bewildered on that front. There's this cool touch I noticed where if you enter into any of the shops or services while under an ailment or a curse, the shopkeeper will actually comment on it.
You look bad. You gotta take care of yourself.
The main reason why this area is memorable to me is it's the area where you find the crossbow, which is easily the best ranged weapon in the game. Because of the amount of stuff you can get from enemy drops, you're going to be plowing through most of the second half of this game, but it never gets to the point where it feels too easy or too hard. For every cursed or screwed up enemy they throw at you in this game, they give you an equally powerful tool on your side of the matter. Worship Domain starts almost immediately with that mole telling you about a secret.
Oh, there should be a place in the room that transports you. If you go past there, you'll get to Necron's area. Oh.
And then you're faced with a bunch of really interesting looking enemies.
Warper. Crossbreed. Master Knight.
These knights here probably have my favorite armor design in the entire game. And the way they move just sounds like somebody walking along with a big stack of plates in their hand. The requirements to clear out the last few worlds in the game are slightly different than the ones in the first half, because instead of taking out a singular boss that frees up the area, you're up against this fleet of weirdos, with my favorites being this crazy juggler that teleports all over the place, or this goth jester lady that breathes really heavily whenever you're near her. Killing all these clowns will give you access to the secret door that'll lead you to the boss room.
I am called Disguise. It will be my pleasure to destroy you now.
Disguise is a really fun fight. They're surrounded by these floating heads that make stock laughing noises, and they spam a ton of attacks at you. Luckily I came in with full ammo for my crossbow, so unfortunately their ASMR career had to be cut short.
No, it cannot be.
Okay, I'm leaving now.
Layer 6, Monster World, Full House.
Lizard Man!
This is easily the shortest world in the game. It's only got 2 areas, and they're both on the smaller side. Luckily, both areas have really interesting gimmicks to them, with False Eye being made entirely out of secret doors. It kinda reminds me of those old Wolfenstein maps that had a ton of interactable walls. The first handful of rooms are infested with these headless ape creatures that crawl on the floor, but you meet up with this friendly lizard man that
look like a Muppet.
Welcome to Monster World. This is the realm of the demon, Necron, the nightmare world of Belial.
Okay.
I'll give you a gift from my master. If we meet again, that is. Farewell.
I also found another entity that I had never found before, and it kinda scared me when it appeared.
Kerper.
While this is probably the weakest world of the game simply because of its length, there's still a decent amount of worthwhile content that's packed into it. There's a basement section in this area that I'd never really scoped out before, and it's full of these bulky King K. Rool looking things and these demonic skull geese. This aspect of hidden or obscured content has always been one of FromSoft's strengths when it comes to designing a lot of their RPGs. The amount of content that's required to be engaged with in order to reach the ending is often in the minority compared to the stuff that's optional. In almost every one of these games, there's either a handful or a boatload of fully realized areas that have nothing to do with necessary progression. It does wonders for replay value, and respects the player enough to know that if they enjoy the core gameplay loop of exploration and character building, that these large chunks of optional content can become just as, if not more enjoyable, than the main path forward.
I've been waiting for you. Well then, let me give you this.
You meet back up with the lizard man and he gives you the only katana in the game, but then he leaves. No, don't go! Damn.
You look like a Muppet.
If you end up killing all of those headless monsters, a giant one will appear, which, everyone say it with me, I never knew about until this playthrough. He drops an item that I initially had no idea what it was for, but it becomes clearer in the next section. This is always kind of a funny area to me because contrary to popular belief, there's not much screeching going on in this place. So you use the giant ape item in order to see invisible enemies. There was always a couple areas where I was kind of confused as to what was damaging me in previous playthroughs, so this key allows me to fight the enemies that I literally had never seen before.
Cursed demon.
How original.
Dead serpent.
You meet up with Oriel, the demon girl, again, and I must have missed an event with her or something, because as soon as she challenges you to a fight, she kind of fucks off.
Are you prepared to challenge me in battle?
But I don't mind. I'd rather not kill her, for reasons. There's this really cool moment here where you go down this dark corridor, and before you get to the end, you hear another ASMR voice coming from the darkness.
I am Necron, and I am Chaos. It is I who seduced the king, but I am also a warrior, and you will be my next victim.
Okay, let's kill this edgelord.
I have seen your sword, a sword that cuts through chaos. My role here is ended. Go where you wish.
Layer 7, Dead World. Death and wisdom.
This last world goes back to being the length of the first couple worlds in the game. The midsection of the game focuses more on shorter, more intense worlds, but here you're back to dealing with something a bit more long form. You start out in this pretty standard dark castle area with these big knights that are everywhere.
This is the castle of King Edward. No one is allowed entrance here. Leave at once.
That's why I never say yes to a cigarette.
And these demon archers. The most exciting part of this level is this bit where you're going upstairs and you find this room with a bunch of weird tree monsters in it. The undead layer has a gimmick that kind of reminds me of the Fool's Idol fight from Demon Souls. You meet back up with Fat Mole, who sounds a bit more sinister than usual.
Oh, you're not finished yet? Oh, hurry up and kill them all.
You've gone bad at such an early age? Where's your mom?
And you find this throne room full of skeletons, one of which you just can't kill. Luckily, one of them drops a key that unlocks some of the doors outside the boss arena, and they're full of weird monster mouths and laser eyes. There's this detailed model of a hand that I have no idea what its use is, and a giant heart on the wall that spews blood that you have to destroy in order to properly kill the Skeleton King. But that's only the beginning. Much like Illusion World, you've got something of a demon checklist to go through before the area is considered clear. Skeleton King here was number 1.
He was number 1!
And his throne reveals an entrance to another void-looking area. There's some weird enemies here. like dogs, skeletons, and mini dragons, and these vaguely racist figures that hunch over and stun you. Oh, FromSoft. Not even you are immune to 90s era Japanese xenophobia.
1142. Better make it 2. He likes it sweet.
There's this robed skeleton dude that kind of sounds like Martin Short.
If you wish to save humanity so badly, then you should meet the king!
That does this evil little Shrine of Storms laugh during the boss fight. He sends the blood bones on you, as his description states. You end up getting transported to this library area, and you're met with this dude that kind of looks like a mix between a Dragon Ball character and that horny old man from Wicked City.
This place is not for living creatures! Here, memories gather. Now I'll seal that annoying magic of yours. Death and wisdom.
I have a soft spot for the voice acting in this game.
I will not allow anyone to touch my
fingers!
It's really corny in a lot of ways, but you can still tell they're putting effort into things sounding interesting. Yeah, the acting in games like this and stuff like Resident Evil is technically bad. But every piece of dialogue is so memorable and unique because of how it's delivered.
Chris is our old partner, you know.
This is one of those areas that's really confusing at first. There's building block people and flying books that shoot lasers at you, but you don't seem to find any more important boss characters on this lower level. This is one of the more obscure tricks the game pulls on you. Throughout the game there's a couple moments where you return to the central shadow tower and are forced to drop yourself down onto a lower walkway in order to progress. Here on this lowest area of the tower, there's this little platform area that's blocked by a railing, so the only way to access the final area of Death World is by dropping from a higher point of the tower onto this gated platform. The game has no falling damage aside from bottomless pits, so you're not going to be in any Dark Souls 2-esque situations.
I've fallen!
The top part of this library area is kind of surreal in a way because most of the important people in the area simply talk to you and disappear forever.
It is nearly impossible to know what one seeks in life.
We all hung out in a coffee shop called Poopy's up on the strip.
And the game kind of counts this as you defeating them. In a way, it kind of complements the whole library of forbidden knowledge vibe that this area is giving off. The best moments in this game kind of reflect this forbidden kind of vibe. You really get the impression through the audio, the visuals, and the vague storytelling that this really isn't a place that is meant for humans to exist within. You literally passed the human realm a long time ago, and that feeling of descending into surrealism is really fun. This aspect shows itself here with this bugler and these crazy old man heads that walk on their earlobes. It's definitely one of my favorite enemy designs in the game. And with that, you've essentially got everything you need to access the final boss. There's this kind of Vor entrance at the bottom of the Shadow Tower, and if you've killed all the main bosses of the game, it'll let you go into the Void.
You did well to have come so far in that puny human body. Show me respect, and I will kill you painlessly.
Once again, if you've been rationing your health potions carefully, you'll be fighting the final boss with an insane amount of health potions under your belt, so feel free to use whatever overpowered weapons or items you found across the game on him. He does this cool little transition into his second phase, and gets quite a bit faster, so keep on circle strafing because the game's programming doesn't really cater towards this kind of movement.
I will not let you go. I am king. I will defend the title with my own hands.
His final phase is this blob monster, which goes down almost immediately, which is very reminiscent of the final boss in Demon Souls. I mean, the premise of the game itself is pretty similar to Demon Souls as well, with the main character having to brave through these demon-infested regions in order to prevent the neighboring areas from being enveloped in a kind of destructive darkness. There's only 2 cutscenes in the game, one for the intro and one for the pre-credit sequence. And you really get the impression that the devs really weren't focusing on music and cinematics, because both aspects are pretty bad.
This crown gave me power to become a conqueror.
I love how it kind of zooms in on the crown at the end, like it's gonna do a Sailor Moon sequence. And get a load of this credits song. Well, I've always known that these games were sources of inspiration for the later Souls games. I never realized how much was taken from them. It's very clear that they wanted to make games that were much bigger than the hardware was allowing them to make. It's not a major knock against this game. It serves as a window into a time where throwing a bunch of weird PS1 models into a bunch of dark fantasy tunnels was just the way these games used to go. And it's so much fun just to see what kind of whacked out atmosphere the game immerses you in. From the nonsensical wall messages to the psychedelic enemy designs, to the occasional bursts of horror and despair, the demon worlds here genuinely feel like you're stepping on cursed ground. While there are some minor elements of the game that feel cursed in a more negative way, the main issue with the game comes down to accessibility. Sure, the whacked out control scheme I set up in the intro section had worked for me, but it's not going to work for everybody. I did enjoy playing things like the Demon Souls remake, but over the entirety of FromSoft's catalog, I think these earlier games are the ones that are the most deserving of a remake. Because with some of these games you can really see the skeleton of a great experience in here, but it's so bogged down by the limitations of the technology of the time. Just don't change the attack animations. They're perfect just the way they are.
He's hacking and whacking and smacking. He's hacking and whacking and smacking. He's hacking and whacking and smacking. He just hack, whack, chopping at me.
Hi! Thanks for sticking to the end of the video. FromSoft as a developer can sometimes have an output that can feel sort of intimidating in terms of the question on like, oh, where do I start with their games? And for me, if I were to choose like a good starting point for any of like FromSoftware's RPGs or just any of their games in general, I'd probably start with either Bloodborne or Elden Ring. If I were to recommend some of the earlier Souls games like Demon Souls and the first 3 Dark Souls games, out of those games, I would probably say Dark Souls 3. I have a weird opinion where it's like, I think that the Dark Souls trilogy, in terms of the grand scheme of like FromSoft RPGs, I think they're on the weaker side. Obviously, I don't think any of them are bad. They're all really good, but Dark Souls 1 has a pretty weak second half, and Dark Souls 2 is just spread with this sort of layer of awkwardness in terms of animations and design. It's kind of like if you mixed Dark Souls 1 together and just spread it evenly instead of having one half be super high quality and the other half not being that. And then Dark Souls 3 is like, it's such a good looking game. It's aesthetically speaking like one of my favorite FromSoft games. I actually might like it better than Bloodborne in terms of how it looks, but those two are like neck and neck in terms of aesthetics. I think Bloodborne's design is just so well designed. It's gonna stand the test of time in terms of its like aesthetic design and just how everything's sort of lit and how everything's shaded. If you are interested in FromSoftware and aren't really interested in some of their like RPGs, I'd recommend like Armored Core 6. Armored Core 6 is fantastic. If you are somebody who's into like more reflex-based gameplay, like really high action, like high response time kind of thing, but aren't like super into like RPG mechanics, I definitely recommend Sekiro. That game is super rock solid in terms of how it's designed, and while it doesn't have the same kind of freedom of player choice that the Souls games do, it's so solidly designed in its intention that it's actually stronger than a lot of the Souls games in terms of focus. I think in the future, if I do have access to a decent PS2 emulator, I will do an episode on Shadow Tower Abyss. I heard that game was fucking fantastic, even better than the original Shadow Tower. And like the only thing I know about it right now is that you can get like guns and shit. From what it looks like, it looks like you're just a person that came from modern times that just got stuck in the Shadow Tower. And I think that's such a cool concept where it's like, yeah, you can find guns and stuff, but like what you're going to be facing inside the tower is still going to be weird, fucked up demon creatures. So if I ever get a hold of like a decent PS2 emulator, that's definitely going to be one of the things I'd be interested in doing an episode on, as well as Kingsfield 4, but of the two, I'd rather do a video on Shadow Tower Abyss. With those things being said, one thing I'd love to hear from y'all is if there's ever a piece of media or a video game or a movie or whatever that you were initially kind of unsure whether or not you liked, but then later on you went back to it and you're like, oh, these things are actually like kind of fucking awesome. And I would love to hear in the comments your experiences with stuff like that. I'd love to hear sort of the reevaluations you've made on a particular piece of media or a media series. I think that'd be really fun. Thanks for watching. There's more to come in the future. See you later.
I can't get up!